Well, Leon asked me to give a little talk about 66 years of trumpet playing. And if I took a minute for each year, that would be too long a talk. So I'll see how much I can condense it. The first part of my little talk is going to be my early years in the music profession and working up to the time that I joined the symphony. Well, 1930 was the year that I began my professional trumpet career. I entered Stanford that year, and there's always been sort of a conflict between music and mathematics, which was my major. So in 1930, well, I'll back up 2 years. In 1928, I was taking lessons from a man by the name of Lee Barton, and he was second trumpet player in the symphony at that time. But the symphony was not all that great a job, and so they played lots of extra things. They worked every place they could. So Lee Barton was playing up at KPO, which was the top floor of Hale Brothers, Fifth and Market in those days. Some of you will remember these things. And he was playing there with Cy Troby. So when he had a conflict with the symphony, he would call me up and say, "Come on up and substitute for me. I have a concert and you come up and play the show." Well, that started a very long musical association with Cy Troby. I played with him for years and years. Well, 1931, the summer of 1931, I was fortunate to get a job at the Warfield Theater with Rube Wolf. Does that name ring a bell? And that was the days when they had stage shows and the girly lines and all the rest of it. I was about getting towards the end of the vaudeville era. So I earned enough money in one summer to pay for a whole year's tuition and education at Stanford. By the way, at the Warfield Theater, in 1924, I had been featured as a trumpet soloist for a week. And that was when George Lipschultz had his theater orchestra. And they used to prop me up and put me on top of the grand piano to play my little solo. So there in 1931, I found myself back at the Warfield Theater. Then in 1931-32, I was substituting at the Fox Theater. And that was when Walt Rosner had the theater orchestra there. And maybe some of you know the name Joe Sinai. He was the orchestra manager in those years. So going to Stanford and substituting 3 days a week up there, well, it didn't make education very easy because I never could get rid of an 8 o'clock class. I always had to report at 8 o'clock, whether I'd worked all night or not, 8 o'clock classes. Well, we'll skip on to 1934. That was my graduation year. And I had A.B. degree in mathematics at that time. And then that summer, 6 of us from Stanford played 7 weeks on the Matson cruise line to the South Seas. Of course, that was before they had any airplanes flying in and out of the South Seas. So we saw the South Seas, I suppose, in a very pristine condition. Then, on that tour, on the South Seas tour, I happened to meet Benny Baker, who was then first trumpet player with the NBC Orchestra in New York. He was on the cruise ship, and so, of course, we talked trumpets and trumpet playing a few times when I would see him in the evenings. Then 1934-35, I began graduate work at Stanford, and at the same time, I was playing with Cy Troby, that name comes up again, at KYA in the Examiner Building at 3rd and Market. Well, that was a little salon orchestra of 12 pieces. And Cy would rehearse anything for the soloist that we would happen to have, and he would rehearse anything that he had to play himself as a solo. Everything else in the program was sight reading. And believe me, it was a difficult job because he had a library that wouldn't stop. And he would pull out all of these things, condensations from operas or symphonies and so on. And I'd sit there and I'd see trumpet in F, and I'd see trumpet in E, and trumpet in D. And of course, A trumpet was almost as common as B flat with those little orchestra arrangements. So I guess I had a lot of good training when I was playing there at KYA. And then in 1935-36, I played extra in the San Francisco Symphony, and that was the last year I had charge of the symphony. And in June of 1936, I had my master's degree from Stanford in mathematics, but also went down to San Diego with the San Francisco Symphony with Alfred Hertz because we were playing the exposition, the San Diego Exposition at Balboa Park. I was taken along to play fourth trumpet and triangle. Rather unique double. The part that I had to play as fourth trumpet, let's see if I can remember the tune. Sorcerer's Apprentice. Well, at the end of the summer, having played the San Diego Exposition, I had accumulated enough money, so I took a trip back to Bound Brook, New Jersey, because I wanted to visit a friend that I had gone through Stanford with, and he was working for American Cyanamid back in Bound Brook. So we went around together and visited some of the area because I'd never been east before. And one day we stopped at Rutgers University. I wanted to see some of the universities. We'd visited Princeton and a few others around. And I said, I think I'll go in and ask them if they've got a job. So very unexpectedly, I got a job teaching mathematics at Rutgers in the fall of 1936. Well, being born and raised out here in California, I didn't like it all that much. So a year later, I decided that I'd come back here. And so in 1937, I got a job at Stanford University as instructor in mathematics with the understanding that I would do more graduate work. In 1938, I was appointed director of the Stanford Band. And in those years, the Stanford Band director was paid a pittance, and it was paid by the Board of Athletic Control. There was no music department. And the band, I was responsible for football and the marching, making up all of the formations and so on. Then we had to play basketball games. We had to play track and also baseball games. Well, when we weren't doing all of that, we used to give some concerts in the Stanford Quad. Well, 1939 and 40, in the summers, I was still teaching at Stanford. In the summers, I was the soloist of the official exposition band at Treasure Island. I couldn't play during the school months, but in the summers I could. And I think it was the first year, maybe it was the second, Goldman came out with his band from New York, Goldman's band. And I made good friends with three very fine cornet players, Leonard Smith, and there was Frank Alsace and Frank Mahoney. Leonard Smith did a lot of solo work with Goldman, but they featured the cornet trio many times. So Leonard and I have stayed in touch with one another, and Leonard is the conductor of the Detroit concert band, has been for many years. Well, we'll skip on to 1941. In the spring of 41, the San Francisco Symphony was to record 4 numbers for RCA. And the first trumpet player would not agree to the terms offered. So Julius Haug, who was the orchestra manager at that time, suggested to management that I be contacted as a possible fill-in. So they called, and I said yes, it was possible. But that meant setting up a meeting with Pierre Monteur in his hotel suite on California Street near Jones to see, of course, if I could handle the parts. So I went up to his suite, and he gave me the music. It was Frank D minor Symphony, Ravel La Valse, Berlioz Benvenuto Cellini, and Chabrier Espagne. So Monteur sat in his easy chair. He was in sort of a smoking jacket. He didn't smoke, but that's what it looked like. He was sitting there in the chair, and he took a pencil out, and he said, well, let's do the Franck. So I put up the Franck music, and he would call out places that he wanted to hear the trumpet, and he would conduct for me. Well, that went pretty well. Then he said, well, let's go to the Ravel La Valse. And, maybe I had to try some things a couple of times. Benvenuto Cellini, no problem. And Chabrier, Espagne, the only problems were to follow the beat, because there are many, many rubatos in Chabrier. So Monteur took me through all of these things, and after I'd finished playing all he wanted to hear, all he said was, why don't you come and play with us? Which was, well, that was kind of nice of him. Now, so we made a date when I had to report to record. But in those days, the recording sessions were in the Opera House from 1 o'clock in the morning until 3. The reason for this was that the studios for making the 78 records were in Los Angeles. And it was imperative to have an open telephone line available, because everything was broadcast from the Opera House on telephone line, was shot down to Los Angeles, and the masters were made there. The symphony, of course, had programmed these pieces during the season, so there were no extra rehearsals for the recordings. It seemed like Monteur expected me to sit in the first trumpet chair and play. Well, all the years of playing with Cy Troby and reading at sight, all the transpositions and everything, well, it really did pay off. And the second trumpet player, remember I mentioned the name Lee Barton. There he was, sitting on second trumpet. He'd been one of my teachers, and it was good to have a friend. So 2 weeks later, I received a check in the mail. There was no thank you, and there was not even a word saying, we won't be needing you again. Absolutely nothing. Well, that moves on to 1941. And I took a year, I went up to UC Davis. I got a job at UC Davis because my instructorship had run out at Stanford. I hadn't finished my PhD. Professor said, well, you can still work on your degree, but we can't offer you the job anymore. So I was in UC Davis for a year. And I used to come down on weekends occasionally and play solos with Ralph Murray and the Park Band. I guess I came down 4 or 5 times and played solos with him. That kept some musical connection with the Bay Area. Well, UC Davis was shut down completely by the war. It was taken over by the Navy. So all non-tenured people were dismissed, I being one of them. So I got a job at the University of Oregon in Eugene. Eugene had programs for the Army Air Corps, Army engineers, and also civilian classes. So they need lots of math teachers. And my mathematics career seemed to be going along pretty well until May 1944. And I received a letter from Julius Haug, personnel manager of the symphony, saying Pierre Munter would like me to play first trumpet for him. Well, I resigned from U of O. I informed my professor at Stanford that I would be leaving the PhD program, and thus began my tenure as first trumpet in the San Francisco Symphony. In those days, the first trumpet of the symphony also played first chair in the opera and in the ballet, and then we had to scrounge around to play casuals to make a living. The symphony season in those days was 22 weeks. The opera season was about 8 weeks here, with 2 weeks in Los Angeles after the season was over. The ballet, well, maybe 3 or 4 weeks, and possibly 2 or 3 Stern Grove concerts. And that was it. We'll skip over a few years, and I've made a note here that I think with the 8-week tour of the United States that the symphony made in 1947, I think the symphony started to grow in importance then. One of the things that Munter told us as we were preparing for this trip, he said, you know, the East Coast, they think we are all sauvages. He says, let's show them that the sauvages can also make good music. Well, the tour introduced us to the United States, and lots of good guest conductors started to come out here. I'll read the ones I remember. Bruno Walter, Dmitri Mitropoulos, William Steinberg, Frickschei, I've forgotten his first name, he was a Hungarian, George Schulte, Leonard Bernstein, Leopold Stokowski, Igor Stravinsky, Sir Thomas Beecham, Artur Bodansky, Erich Leinsdorf, George Zell, Dino Cantelli, and Fausto Cleva. That's an impressive list of conductors. Thank you. So, I played under all of these men, and usually things that they wanted to really feature, their important pieces that they knew. Well, after that, the small season of light symphony summer concerts seemed to attract more and more attention, and the summer season really blossomed when Arthur Fiedler was persuaded to come out and conduct a summer series a la Boston Pops. And playing first trumpet for him was a chore. He liked to have lots of trumpet. I've got a story about him later. So now we come to a few anecdotes that I have selected that I happen to remember. You know, I'm getting a little senile, so I don't remember everything that happened in those days, but here are a few. 2 of these things happened before I became a regular member of the symphony. I was going to Stanford, and I went to a Stanford University sponsored symphony concert, San Francisco Symphony, Molinari conducting. Well, in those days, towards the end of the 20s, 29, early 30s, the San Francisco had what they call the Oilers Club in the symphony. You can guess. And things would start out just great at the beginning of the concert. And by the end of the concert, there were members of the orchestra that weren't performing so well. And as I understand, they used to have the little flask in their coat pocket, and they had a straw. And the nipping that went on during the evening took its toll. Well, Symphony was playing Tchaikovsky's Fourth Symphony, and come to the finale movement, and there are several, of course, very important brass entrances building up to the final climax. And first big entrance for the brass, Molinari gives a tremendous cue and downbeat for the brass. Nothing much happened. And I could hear him, corny, trombone. So it goes on for a few more measures, and another big climax comes. And so Molinari gives an extra big cue like that. Again, not much happens. And he stands there beating for the rest of the orchestra, and he shouts, "Assassini!" Well, that was one. In 1936, I was playing extra. That was when last year of Hertz's reign, and Benny Klaskin was the first trumpet player, and they were rehearsing one of the Wagner excerpts, Götterdämmerung something, and Hertz stops at one point and he says, "Trompeten, I need more sound. I want huge sound." And there was just a moment of silence, and Benny says, "Maestro," he says, "the trumpets are playing as loud as I can." Now we skipped quite a few years, and I remember an event in 1946. Bruno Walter was the guest conductor, and we're playing in the Civic Auditorium. And he was a guest conductor, of course, and we always knew what the programs were going to be. The programs were posted down in the Opera House. So I knew that he was going to do Leonora number 2. Well, being trumpet players, maybe you know that Leonora 3 is the most popular of the overtures, Leonora overtures. 2 you hear once in a while, not that often. So anyway, I went out and bought a record, because I'd never played 2 in my life. I bought a record, and the record happened to be Bruno Walter conducting one of the German orchestras. And I listened to the record, and the trumpet player played adequately on the record, but he played it with the breath mark as you see in most of the excerpts. And I didn't particularly like that, so I prepared it differently. No, maybe you know the thing. You go. That was the German style. Well, I wanted to do it without a breath, and the last. The G I felt should be longer than what I heard on the record, so I played. Like so. That's the way I practiced the thing. So we come to the rehearsal. I'm out beyond the curtains there someplace. You know, they always stick us out behind the curtains. And the orchestra comes to the point, and I had no backstage conductor. I had to rely on what I heard. So time came when I played the first call. And after that, nothing. Complete silence. The orchestra didn't play it. So one of the stagehands comes and looks me up and he says, Dr. Walter wants to talk to you. So I come out behind the curtains and I walk out there so I can face Bruno Walter. And he says, you do not take a breath. And I said, no, I don't take a breath where it's marked. He says, don't you need one? I said, well, no, I haven't been practicing it that way. He says, all of my trumpet players take a breath there. He says, I've never heard it done this way. I said, well, may I play it this way? He looks at me and says, can you do it that way all the time? I said, yes, maestro, I think so. He says, it sounds very good. He says, you do it your way. The next anecdote is a confrontation with Arthur Fiedler. That can be something. Well, he had his own music. He brought all his own music out. And we were playing something that was a potpourri of one of the music shows. So it would go from one number to another number with segues where there's modulations and so on. So we came to one second ending which went into a modulation to the next tune, and we got to this point, and all of a sudden Fiedler stopped and he rapped on the conductor's stand and he said, "First trumpet, you're playing wrong notes." I said, "Where, maestro?" He said, "Well, in the second ending, there's wrong notes." I said, "Please, may we try it again?" So he backs up a little ways and we come to the part again. He was really furious. He pounded that stand. He said, "First trumpet, I told you you're playing wrong notes." Well, at that point, I took my music and got out of my chair like this, and I started to walk towards Fiedler. And Fiedler came down off of that podium and he started walking towards me. Well, we met in the viola section. So I gave him the music. And he looks at the music, he looks at it again, he hands it back to me, he turns back this way and he says, "Well, he's playing the notes that are written on that page." He says, "But that's not the way we do it in Boston." Always the last dig. Well, there are times when first trumpet has responsibility maybe that he should assume, whether anybody tells him so or not. The next anecdote occurs at Stern Grove on a Sunday afternoon, and we were playing Leonora number 3. This does not involve the call at all. The call went just great and everything, but the last section of Leonora is a very fast coda section where the strings enter one group after another, and the conductor, he's gone now, is Adler. Kurt Adler was a conductor, and at the rehearsal, this section did not go all that well. Couldn't get the violins and the violas and second violins and the cello and everything to come in together right, because he had a funny beat like this sometimes, and looks like he's scratching something. And so the violins tried it several times, and Adler couldn't quite decide whether he wanted to take it in two or take it in one. Or so they finally, I think, decided, well, maybe they'd better try it in two. So comes the performance. They come to that spot. Adler starts in, and all of a sudden, he didn't know whether he wanted to go in one or go in two, and the string sections were absolutely lost. I mean, it was just utter chaos. So everybody's scratching away, and so this started to go on for several measures, and I looked up and down the row here, and I told my trumpet players and trombone, I said, watch for the cue. We're going to come in on that big chord. So I let these guys struggle for a little while, and I picked up my horn and I said, now. Boy, the orchestra just gelled, and they... So, that was a responsibility that I guess worked out right. The next anecdote occurs in the opera, and we were playing Charpentier Louise, and I think it featured Dorothy Kirsten. Anybody here remember that name? Have you heard Dorothy Kirsten? She was a lovely, charming soprano. Well, towards the end of the first act in Louise, some of the orchestra, the winds, have to go backstage for a little stage band that sort of sets the finale for the first act. Those days there were no television cameras, so backstage we had usually an Italian, of course, from Italy, who was on a ladder and peeks through the stage backdrop. They cut a little hole, and so they'd peek through this way, and then they give us a cue, like the usual cue was 4, 3, 2, last, and then we come in. So we were back there, and this fellow was up on the ladder, ready to give us the cue, and it goes 4, 3, 2, and at that point he starts to stumble on the ladder, and believe me, everything comes crashing down. The ladder comes crashing down, he comes crashing down. There was no one, there was no last. Well, Eddie Hogg was playing with me in the opera, and we knew the tune. We'd rehearsed it and everything. So these guys were laying around on the floor, and we played. Now comes another Leonora 3 story. All trumpet players know Leonora 3 stories, starting probably with Harry Glantz and when he was playing back in New York. So there are a myriad of stories, but I have one that's personal. The conductor that was conducting the opera thought it would be just great if the first call came from stage, say, right, as you're on the stage, and then the second call from stage left, and first call you should play facing the back, and the second call you should play facing front, all of that nonsense. And so he worked it out with the backstage crew and the backstage conductor that I was to be taken up in the elevator to the 3rd floor in the Opera House and play the first call from right about where the elevator's empty. Then guess what? You have to walk across the catwalk to the other side of the stage, and it looked like it was 50 feet down there. And then you get to the other side of the catwalk, and then you turn and play. Well, I really was glad when those 3 performances were over, believe me. Let's see, the next story I think I have to tell about Leinsdorf, Erich Leinsdorf. Marvelous conductor most of the time, and he was out for the opera, and he had to conduct Carmen, and he had to conduct La Tosca, among other things. I think he only had 1 German opera that year. Well, looking back, it was kind of not a very wise choice. The Carmen was pretty straightforward and rigorous. And at the end of the first act in Carmen, the violas did something. I can't remember what happened, whether the violas were looking at the stage, trying to find out what was going on up there. Anyway, Leinsdorf became absolutely enraged at these first stand violas, and he actually expectorated at them in the pit. And he was shouting at them, and he spit at them. No doubt about it. So at the end of the act, which was very close there, the orchestra almost as one stamped him out of the pit. When he started to go out of the pit, we all did this. And when he came in for the second act, guess what? We stamped him in again, like this. The orchestra was absolutely furious that this could happen from a conductor. Well, a few weeks later, we were in Los Angeles for the 2 weeks down there after the opera season. And, of course, we were going to do these things down there. We were going to do Tosca with him. And this is one of the neatest ways of an orchestra to get back at a conductor I've ever seen. I don't know I've never found out who is really responsible for this little gig, but here it is. Everybody in the orchestra had one of these things in their folder when we started to play Tosca that night. And Erich Leinsdorf had one of these right in the front of his score also. And it says, Edition Leinsdorf. 1, 2, 3. Keine Fermaten. Schmalz ist verboten. Keine Rubaten. And here, Das Tosca, music drama in dry Achtung, music von Johannes Puccini. Well, that's it. I mean, that's one of the nicest spoofs I've ever seen. I've kept it all of these years. Well, a few remarks. I'm trying to watch that clock back there. Few remarks. I think the symphony tour in 1947 probably was a symphony tour to top all tours as of that year, of course, but it certainly was bigger than anything that had preceded us. We played 54 concerts in 56 days. And there was a choice of 4 programs that were sent out to the various cities, and one of the programs that proved to be the most popular listed César Franck's D minor symphony and Richard Strauss's Don Juan. So on that tour, I played Don Juan 32 times, and of course César Franck 32 times. Well, it didn't get boring because we had the conductor that didn't let it get boring. Monter was a genius in that way. And we didn't have any rehearsals either, except one in Canada and I think one in New York City. And 2 rehearsals in 8 weeks. He just let the orchestra play. And he didn't let anything get boring. A few remarks about recording with Monter. He hated recordings, absolutely hated them. because in those days you would have to make one side of a 78 and then stop. You have to wait for the technicians to get a new platter ready and then take another side 5 minutes later. And to Monter, that was just absolutely, that was catastrophe. He wanted to play the music and to play for a little while, but that's the way we had to record in those days. And so if you hear a record of Berlioz's Fantastic Symphony, that was done that way. And it was done from 1 o'clock in the morning until 3 in the morning. And always we played a concert, and Saturday night was usually the case. We'd play the concert. Berlioz Symphony would be the last thing on the program. Then you'd have a break for an hour and a half or something like that. Then you come back and have to record it. If you hear Stravinsky's Rite of Spring, it was made the same way. We played the thing on the concert and turned around and came back and started to record the thing at night, 1 to 3. Strauss's Ein Heldenleben, same way. And Scriabin, the poem of ecstasy, same way. And another thing, in all of the recordings that I ever made with Monter, he only gave 2 people the right to re-record anything. The concertmaster, Naum Blinder, and his brother, the cello player, Boris Blinder. Those were the only 2 that ever had any chance of re-recording anything. So what you hear is what we do. I mean, you sit and you play, say, the poem of ecstasy. It's a hard piece for trumpet. And you know that you're never going to have another chance. I mean, that's it. You play it once, and that's what's going to go on the tape, or not the tape, the discs. Well, it put some pressure on a lot of us, but that's the way it had to be. I see Chris Budges in the audience, and I also see Laurie, some of my very good friends that play in the symphony still. I have a little tiny story I have to interject right here. Monter had made a record called Chanson B-flat Symphony. And we played it that way, same way, no retakes, no fixing of notes or anything. Well, my wife and I were at the open rehearsal here, what was it, a week or 2 weeks ago, and the guest conductor was playing this Chanson Symphony. I went back to see my friends during intermission, and they were sitting there and I said, well, this is kind of draggy stuff, isn't it? And they were getting kind of bored with all the French music. And I didn't think it was all that exciting sitting out there in the audience either. So that evening, after I'd gotten home, I dug out my record of Chausson and I said, I've got to find out if this is as dull as dishwater or not. And absolutely I was amazed. The difference between what I heard this conductor do and what I heard coming out of that record was night and day. It's exciting when you play with a guy like Monter. It really is. You get excited and you play maybe this high above your head. But with a poor conductor, it's just the opposite. I mean, you can't play up to your level even. Well, here's another little anecdote, maybe is a little more on the bright side. At one season of Monter's reign, we had a season that we played modern music every single week. The board of directors decided that he had to play a modern piece every single week. Well, Roger Sessions was over at University of California, composer, and he had finished his first symphony. And we were going to give the premiere performance of Roger Sessions' first symphony. And Monter was very, very particular about rehearsing modern things. He wanted the orchestra to do a fine job on him, and he wanted to personally see if he could get as much out of the score as possible. So we rehearsed for 2 weeks on this Sessions symphony to get it ready for performance. And Roger Sessions was there every single rehearsal, a huge score like this, and he sat in a chair down there at Monteur's left, right down below him. Well, during the rehearsals, there came a little section where Roger was displeased with what he heard, Monteur was displeased with what he heard from the orchestra, and so we stopped, and Monteur and Sessions talked a little bit, and then we tried it again. And Monteur didn't like something again, so Monteur stopped, and he turned to Roger with his score like this. He says, "Roger, you know, at measure 322, he says, should that low nut be A natural or A flat?" To Monteur, a note always came out nut. You know, should that nut be A flat or A natural? And Roger sits there for a moment or two and looks at this huge score and looks up and down just like this. And he looks up and he says, "Maestro, I don't think it makes any difference." Another Kurt Adler story. I guess it was one of the very few times where I ever tried to play any kind of a prank on a conductor. We had good associations and most of the time, but he was difficult at other times. We were rehearsing a children's concert, and Kurt Adler was the conductor of the children's concerts at that time. And we were doing the famous Tannhäuser. The rehearsal was getting long, the orchestra was tense, Adler was tense with us. So then we got through with the last number, and Adler says, I want to go back and do the Tannhäuser again. Well, we certainly didn't want to do it. And I looked at my colleagues and I said, "Let's play it a half a tone higher this time." And I got the trumpets fine because they were sitting right here with me. The trombones, I think Vic Kress talked to the trombones. He had, half a tone higher, half a tone higher. Horns on this side. So Adler comes down and downbeat, and strings come in. The whole orchestra comes in. Adler blew his top. What are you people doing? Playing the wrong key. Of course, I took a big chance, because if he had perfect pitch, he would have known the first entrance of us. It was the wrong key, but he didn't. Well, it broke the spell. I mean, it sort of released the tension, and Adler didn't get mad because he knew he had been had. In my days with the symphony, we didn't have any health insurance. We didn't have anything. We didn't have any... if we got sick and missed a few days, it came out of our pay. I mean, they just took the money away and gave it to whoever they hired to come in and sub. That's the way it was in those days. Well, one of the things that I remember, where I think of playing a Brahms symphony, and so lots of times people would come and play rehearsal. The first trombone and the third trombone, Giozzi and Clark, they got down, put their trombones down, helped Roger, took him off the stage, set him down in a chair back there, and had the stage manager watch him until they get somebody to look at him. They came back on stage and we merrily went our way and played the rest of the symphony. Now, that was one of the things I remember. Let's see. Another thing that happened in the trombone section during the concert, I think it was in a Tchaikovsky symphony. Johnny Clark, the bass trombone player, and they sat over here on this side of me, and sort of in a little tiny curve, so out of the corner of my eye I could see Johnny over there, and the tuba player. We were going along just great in the Tchaikovsky symphony, and all of a sudden I saw something bounce down, and it was the bass trombone slide. He'd lost the slide, and it went ding, 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 ding. So, puts the rest of the trombone down, goes down 1, 2, 3 levels, picks up the slide all the time the symphony is going on. Comes back, puts the thing back together again. Luckily, it didn't dent anything. I think it moved. So we just merrily went our way. We'll get a little time for a few comments yet.
Sure. Yeah, there's no trombone section here, except for Dick Bowman.
Oh, Dick would love that story. Well, here are just some observations that I remember during these years. You know, the famous trumpet players that sort of set the style for all of the symphonic playing in the late 20s and the 30s and the 40s, there was Harry Glantz, there was Schlossberg, Vladimir Drucker, and Benny Klatskin. These 4 guys were very, very important in the symphonic trumpet playing in the United States. What's Schlossberg's first name? Max? I didn't remember. So Max Schlossberg. Out of these 3, out of this group of 4, 3 actually played first trumpet in the San Francisco Symphony. Harry Glantz was out here as a young man. Vladimir Drucker was first trumpet for quite a while, San Francisco Symphony. And of course, Benny Klatskin had quite a reign here in San Francisco. The one that didn't come out, Schlossberg. The player that I admired because of his facility with which he played and beautifully focused sound was the trumpeter in Leonard Leopold Stokowski's Philadelphia Orchestra. This was in 1936 when they came out here on tour. The name, Saul Caston. Lovely, lovely trumpet player. And he had a style that was somewhat different from the 4 names that I mentioned above. The Frenchmen in Boston were not so well known in those days. Why? Because most of the coverage that the orchestras got from back east, most of the coverage on radio was New York and Philadelphia. You'd always hear New York Philharmonic broadcasting or NBC Symphony broadcasting, or they'd go down to Philadelphia, or then you would have opera broadcasts from the Met. But Boston was sort of in its little cubby hole up there, and they were not featured as much. Maybe you remember, some of you, that Roger Voisin's father was the second trumpet player, René Voisin, and Mager was the first trumpet player for many years up there in Boston. Maybe just something that came to my head. Maybe you would like to know what I think about what it takes to take care of the first chair in the symphony. I've made a little outline here. A, the technical ability to produce the correct notes, obviously, that has to be there. And no doubt about it. Second, B, it takes nerve. And C, you've got to have an ego. And these things have to interact with one another so that one feeds on the other. See, if you have nerve, it helps you play. Or the ego tells you, well, this is going to be great. But if you can't play the notes, it doesn't make any difference about the other 2. But these 3, These three have to keep interacting all the time. Now, these, and speaking mathematically, these are the necessary conditions. They are not sufficient. There's one thing that is left out. The necessary and sufficient conditions. The last one, there must be the desire, an intense desire to make music, and you have to genuinely enjoy hearing what comes out of the end of the bell. That's the fourth. I'll take 2 more minutes, and this is kind of a sad story. The tragedy of bad conductors. When Enrico Horda was appointed conductor, the general feeling was that after 20 years of having a French conductor, maybe this change would be good for both the orchestra and the audience. Well, for the first couple of years, it worked out fairly well. He did a lot of things that he knew better than a lot of conductors in the world. Spanish literature that we seldom played, he knew. But it soon became apparent that he didn't know the rest of the literature all that well. And a conductor can't fake a good orchestra. Impossible for a conductor to fake a good orchestra. So we found that in many ways he was trying to fake his way through. And then there were certain things that were kind of disasters along the way. One program, he Spanish danced on the podium a lot. And one program he got too near the edge and he lost his balance and he ended up in the viola section. The orchestra plays merrily along in the viola section. I mean, the first 2 players help him up and help him back on the podium, and he has to all the time the orchestra's playing. They played better. So anyway, the morale slipped in the orchestra, and the discipline was not all that good. Actually, the orchestra became a reading society. There was more reading going on than I've ever seen in any orchestra in my life. Well, because he finally resorted to trying to teach us, like a bunch of little kids. And he would lecture to us, unending lectures, 20 minutes to describe the opening of a Beethoven symphony. And it didn't get any, well, it got worse. I mean, after all the lectures and so on, when he tried to conduct it, you know what happens. And during his reign, there were 2 suicides in the orchestra, first chair people, and there was another wind player that had a complete nervous breakdown. He'll never play again. These were the tragedies that happened within the orchestra. Well, I took this environment until about 1959. I reached a point where I felt I simply couldn't face another rehearsal with this man. I played the opera season in 1960, the fall of 1960, but I told the symphony personnel manager on the way home that I would not report for the symphony season. So that's when I retired from the symphony. Starting in 1941, I played 22 years at the Bach Festival, so I didn't give up playing. I still play. I love it. I enjoy it. I hope it keeps me young for a few more years. After 1961, I returned to the teaching field, and I taught high school mathematics at Woodside High School for 13 years. And I belong to a men's club called Family. We have our own symphony orchestra. I have fun playing there, and sometimes I conduct a little. And in my old hometown in Mountain View, I go down there once a week and play with a group, a little salon orchestra. I think it's bigger than that now. What, 32 or 33? And I call it the Senile Symphony. Thank you for your...